Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. This next disease is a very serious disease. It is a very scary disease. And it is one that I fear, and I think that a lot of us should have real fear if we're going to be truthful, because it is a disease that few people are saved from. We all have a tendency to become arrogant. Kibr is seeing oneself as being better than another person. It's very simple. You feel you're a better Muslim than someone else. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one hadith is narrated to have said, he says, لا يدخل الجنة من كان في قلبه مثقال ذرة من كبر. That a person will not enter Jannah in whose heart is an atom's weight, a small, teeny amount of arrogance and kibr. This becomes a problem, especially when you're praying a lot, you're fasting, you're reading Quran, you find these blessings that Allah has allowed you to take part in, but instead of it leading you to being more grateful and being more humble, it leads you into arrogance. Arrogance is what expelled Shaitan, the devil, and got him cursed. It was his arrogance. It was his arrogance before God that he thought and believed he was better than Adam. He didn't have that knowledge. Being arrogant is basically a disease that has to also do with ignorance, because a person is unaware of all of the variables. A person who's arrogant thinks he's better than others just because he prays a lot, or she prays a lot, or just because they have a certain attire or a certain look, or whether they wear hijab or niqab or some other religious thing. That is good. It's not saying it's not good. That you pray a lot, it's not bad. That's a good thing. But the feeling that it creates after, that is of concern. You see, some people, they pray a lot, they fast a lot, but it only leads them to more humbleness before God, because their concern is, hey, I don't even know if God is going to accept what I'm doing. إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Allah only answers from the people of taqwa. So they have a fear. I don't know if God's going to accept it. Now, one of the things about being arrogant is, even when the truth is before you, you won't follow it because of your arrogance. And this is exactly what happened to Shaitan. Because of his arrogance, he failed to recognize the divine command and the wisdom in Allah creating Adam. God knows everything. He is all knowing, He's all wise. So when He created something Himself and He commanded all to bow down, you bow down, because you know God knows everything, you don't. And you are just a creation of His. You wouldn't be anything without His divine providence, without His care, without His guidance, without His special looking out for you. So why become arrogant? Arrogance is a very big disease. In fact, one of the great scholars, he mentioned that sins and wrong action that leads a person to being humble and broken before God and repentant and remorseful is better than a person that through his good actions only led him to an arrogant place. The latter is the state of the devil, that this is what it led to him. All that worship that he did, and it is narrated he worshipped Allah a lot, but it didn't get any benefit to him. It didn't give him any benefit. In fact, it was a cause of his destruction in the end, because these acts of worship that he did, and pay attention here, this is very important. All these things that he did, of prostrations and prayers, eventually led to a quality within him that made him arrogant. And similarly, if we're praying and we're fasting and we're doing all these different things and it leads to the quality of arrogance, then we're just like Shaitan. And we have this sickness in our heart. How do we rid ourselves of kibr? This is the great question. Number one, we can reflect on the end affair of the mutakabbirin, those who are arrogant. What happens to all of them? Fir'aun, Qarun, all the arrogant, Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, all these arrogant people that felt they were too great to submit to God and bow down with those who bowed down. What happened to them in the end? They were conquered, they died, they left this earth in a terrible state, And now in the hereafter, they're being punished. Allah mentions that Fir'aun is being punished in the morning and evening, and in the hereafter, he'll be even in a bigger punishment. So this is the end affair of all mutakabbirin. Allah will not let you thrive. He'll allow you to do what you do in the world, but that's not going to be good for you. That'll only be more destruction for you and more punishment in the end. So reflect on the end affair of all arrogant people. Reflect that, subhanAllah, if I'm arrogant, a'udhu billah, what happens to me in the end of my life? Will I be able to utter the kalima of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? Will something big happen in order to teach me a lesson to become humble? A'udhu billah. How do we know if we're humble or not? Sometimes you hear Muslims say, in my humble opinion, to see your humbleness, according to one of our great scholars, Imam Ibn Ata'illah, a person to see their humility is arrogance. To see your humility is arrogance. How? Because you must be in a high place to see your low state. In other words, you say, oh, I'm so low, I'm so humble. That is arrogance in and out of itself, because you are claiming that you have this wonderful spiritual state of being humble. Man tawada'a lillah rafa'ahu Allah. Whoever is humble before Allah, Allah will raise them. Allah. Reflect also that everything you have is from Allah. We have a dua of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma inni as'aluka fa'al al-khayrat wa tark al-munkarat. Oh Allah, I ask you for the performance of good deeds and the avoidance of all sins, to avoid all sins. When we realize that there is not a blessing that we have, and every time we do a good deed, one of the du'as of when you perform good deeds that Allah allowed you, facilitated for you, and gave you tawfiq, which is success, is to say, Alhamdulillahi bi ni'matihi tatimmu salihat. All praise is due to Allah, who by His blessing, good deeds were performed and observed. So the thanks and praise belongs to Allah alone. And then reflect that, what if I've done one bad sin that Allah may hold me accountable for, that I didn't make tawbah for? This is why one of the scholars, he said, there are three things God is hidden in three things. He is hidden His pleasure, His divine pleasure, rida, His reward in your good deeds. You don't know which deed you ever perform that may earn His mercy. We have the story of the prostitute that gave water to a dog, and she was forgiven for that. We have the story of a man that committed, killed 99 people, but in the end he had remorse and he made tawbah, and he left to the land to make tawbah where he was supposed to go. He died halfway and God still accepted his tawbah. And we don't know which good deed it is that earns Allah's pleasure. Sometimes it could be the 2 rakats when no one was ever looking. Right? It could be that $100 or $10 that you gave in the path of Allah with absolute sincerity that earned Allah's pleasure. It could be that time that you served your parents and your parents were so pleased with you. You don't know which deed it is. And therefore, just because you performed all these good deeds, how do you know if anything is accepted to begin with? So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Second, what Allah has hidden is His anger in His disobedience. We don't know, God forbid, and Allah forgive us all, we don't know which action we do that could be the source of our destruction, right? We don't know. If His justice takes us, His wrath, He can hold us accountable for anything, and He has an absolute right to. So don't become arrogant. Think of all the wrongs that you've done. Sometimes when we look at someone we want to be arrogant about, what we assume is that they've committed sins, and we actually don't know what they've done. So the certainty is the wrongs we've done, yourself. And the guess is, I think they've done this, this, and that, and you have no proof. That person can be much more pure than yourself, right? So keep that in mind. When you see somebody you want to be arrogant, say, hey, who knows? This person, I'm sure, has not committed the kind of wrongs I've done. Compared to the knowledge I have, the blessing God has given me, look at the kind of things I've done, I'm sure he doesn't have that, or she doesn't have that. And finally, you never know who is special with Allah. Sometimes maybe we're praying, we're fasting, we're a good Muslim, but a year down, God forbid, we're exposed to fitna, trials, tribulations, we're around the wrong people, we get with the wrong group, and we end up falling apart, and we leave our religion, or we become very, astray, and we begin to give up our guard, so we start committing major sins. And those major sins to other major sins can even eventually lead to kufr, disbelief in and out of itself. So this is why a person that you look at and you're like, look at this person, alhamdulillah, I'm praying, I'm fasting, he's not doing anything. What makes you think that Allah cannot take that person tomorrow, convert them and make them a really pious Muslim, and take you and lower you? One of the great scholars, he was once passed by somebody and he looked at him. He was a drunkard, drunk, and he looked at him. And the man said, is God able to, right? Is God able to raise my level and make me like you? He said, God is able. He said, is he able to then take you and lower you to my position? He said, yes, he's able, right? And the moral of the story there is, you could be where you are today and right now, doesn't mean you're guaranteed the next day or hour or morning or evening or year to be the same person. So don't become arrogant, right? Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all that you have can be stripped from you immediately because of your arrogance. So arrogance is a terrible disease. Look and review this summary, inshallah, to number one, don't assume that person's done that. Assume what you've done is worse, right? The kind of good deeds they've done, maybe you didn't do. And where they're at now, they could be in a different state when they die. And where you're at today, you may not be there tomorrow. May Allah protect us from this terrible, terrible disease. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dawn upon our hearts and illuminate our hearts with His magnitude and His greatness to such a point that we now become low before Him and all arrogance dissipates when the greatness of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala manifests in our hearts. May Allah ta'ala make you and I among those who are humble, truly for His sake. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.